Is the root of all suffering and anxiety in humans the existential dread, the fear of death? That's basically the thesis for Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death. So this book is very heavy, and this review is going to be kind of short because it's really hard to synthesize what was in the book, but I'm going to try my best. So hello, my name is Zach, and this channel I mostly review science fiction and fantasy, but I also delve a little bit into topics like comics, manga, business, and personal development. And this book was recommended as part of a book club with some professors, so a little academic, and that's, spoiler alert, how I found the book. Very academic. So the premise of the book and how we found it as a group was because it's on Mark Manson's recommended reading list. So as someone who enjoys the subtle art of not giving up, I thought this book was worth considering if Manson recommends it, and the premise sounds good. Kind of delving into how human behavior works and human psychology works. And the fact that it won a Pulitzer Prize, of course, it has some like street cred, I guess you could say. But as I struggled, honestly, to get through the book, I found it very dry. So that's my quick overview of the book, is that it's very academic. It reads more like a psychology student textbook or a deep dive into psychological ideas. So I would say if you're reading this, it is helpful to have kind of a basis in psychology. I mean, myself, I only have kind of those gen ed requirements at college, at Psychology 101. So I was aware of things like Freud, and I've heard these other people that they talk about in the book, in other self-help books. But this book was, a deep dive into psychological thinking. And it reminded me a bit of the recent book I read, The Courage to be Disliked, which also talks about kind of these mainstays of psychological, thought that established it and how it's right or wrong as it applies to the modern world. So that's what, the Freud, Kierkegaard, and Otto Rank. So those are the names. I got to look at my notes because this was, a bit of a heavy book. So in that said, so what it boils down to is that our motivation is through being scared of death. And one of the interesting ways, so it was have some good things, was how he equates this, like from an academic perspective, of man versus animal. And he gives an example where, like, if you're hunting a herd of animals, having, the animal next to you die doesn't really cause the rest of the herd to react to that in a scared of death way. It's just kind of the nature of things. They don't really have a context to understand what death is and that it could happen to an animal brain. It just doesn't have a concept of self or consciousness. But humans, on the other hand, are in this unique situation where we also have this idea and this kind of grandiose design, I don't know if that's the right word, that we can be anything, we can create anything, but at the same time, it is all going to end. So it's a weird dichotomy that really kind of makes you think about things, right? That we're told that we can be anything we want to be, we can create, masterpieces, all this into the world that we bring to the world, but that it is going to end, and we kind of know it, but we don't want to admit it. Even now, just talking about it makes me uncomfortable. So the book does make you uncomfortable. It was a struggle to read some of these ideas, these kind of intellectual ponderings on what is death and how it kind of drives us. And the other example that he gives in the book was an example of like soldiers, and that we as humans really think that we just don't want something bad to happen to us, that we kind of wish bad things to happen to the other guy. And even though this book was written ages ago, it's very applicable now to 2025, and how as human psychology, we kind of wish bad things or we assume bad things only happen to other people and they don't happen to us. And that's just human nature. So seeing that or reading that in this book kind of reframes maybe how people in the world work now, and how, like tribalism and the divided state that we live in, the United States. So it's it's very heavy, it's very psychological, and I wanted to talk about those are at least the good things. That is a deep dive into psychology, and it really gets you thinking on these bigger issues, these heavy issues. But some of the negatives that I want to point out was One, that's very dense and academic. Two, that this isn't really a self-help book. So even though we saw this on the Mark Manson list, and his recommendations are usually, in his own books, are very kind of self-help, modern self-help, this is an academic study of what like drives human behavior versus like a modern book where it tells the story of somebody and then how they applied that concept to their life and succeeded. And that's kind of the formula that most self-help books nowadays use. This book, by comparison, is just a deep dive into topics, delving into issues and kind of justifying his work. So this is the other negative, that he sometimes went deep dive on very psychological concepts. So he spends like a whole chapters on Freud and like why Freud did certain things. And there's kind of like a justification or like a book report of what led to Freud's thinking, why he thought this way, why that was established this way. Ultimately, that, or why Freud hung on to certain ideas and didn't want to let go because he was becoming so famous and he wanted to leave a legacy because his own fear of death. And yeah, it got into a lot of very deep topics on Freud. So if you've read this yourself and you found it almost like a biography of Freud or a critique of Freud, maybe that's also what I took away. And I find it as a negative for the book because I was, I guess, maybe not naively, but thinking based on the title and the description that it's going to be more psychology and how, again, that applies more like a modern self-help versus a deep dive academic study book report on the issue and the underlying issues and what led to those issues. So yeah, it's very, and also with that male centric. So it's an older book. So it is kind of a little bit outdated, male centric. He kind of doesn't really have diverse thoughts in this. It's very into that Freud and Freud's inner circle and how they were kind of wrong, not wrong, but how it established one view of thought for psychology, modern psychology, the psychoanalysis and Freud, Oedipus complex, those ideas, but how it's kind of wrong and how there's other underlying motives, namely the denial of death, is what drives human behavior. So yeah, if this is not really a book that I would easily recommend because I didn't really love it myself. I would maybe recommend it to like psychology students, but it's definitely not a casual read. It's not like a beach read, a summer read. And I honestly usually read for either personal development and growth or escapism. That's why I love fantasy and sci-fi, to kind of just get lost in another world as I do chores, ride my bike, exercise, and experience these worlds or find some takeaway to benefit myself. And this book, not that there's not a takeaway, it increases your own understanding and your body of knowledge, but it's not like an actionable James Clear Atomic Habits where, great, I can apply this framework to my own life and how I live my life. It's more something to meditate on, to think about, to grow your own perspective and to widen your perspective. So on that hand, maybe it is good to read, to, again, like other books I've recently talked about, it's sometimes good to get out of your own ruts, that if you only read science fiction, maybe it's good to read something like Denial of Death, which is totally left field, but it changes your thinking and it can expand your horizons. So that it wasn't necessarily time wasted personally, because it did, again, increase my knowledge, but it's not something I would easily recommend to someone that, hey, Zach, what's your, 5 books you recently read? I'd probably list something like a Joe Abercrombie or a sci-fi book that I read, not necessarily The Denial of Death. But those are my thoughts and a brief review, super quick review of Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you've read this or what I should read as a follow-up, because I guess I like more action-oriented books like Atomic Habits, like Alex Hutchinson's Explorer Gene, or Steve Magnus's Win the Inside Game, where it uses real-life examples of how to take these ideas and these, lofty concepts, but then how can I actionably apply it to my own life and better myself? So thanks for watching, and have a great day.